Hey everybody, my name is Paul Liston Jr., aka Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com. I'm joined by former NFL general manager and executive of the year, Randy Mueller. I know the background's different, people. I'm aware, like, Paul, have you been abducted? Are you trying to send a sign for help? No, everything is fine. I'm actually at my radio station for today's festivities. Thought I'd mix it up the same way Randy's mixing it up with a hat. So we're all here, baby, and it's a great time. Randy, how are we, baby?
I'm doing great. I just wrote your different environment off to maybe the celebration of getting a new quarterback in Gang Green. I thought that might have been an all-nighter for you guys in New York.
All right, it's time to just let it all out there. I'm actually at a nightclub. That's why you kind of have the strobing lights effect behind me. And yes, we have been celebrating it. We have been going absolutely crazy on the news that Aaron Rodgers intends, well, to play for the New York Jets. And I guess we'll just kind of change up the show sheet. I know we were going to get to that in a few minutes, but we'll just kind of jump into that right now because I'm curious your thoughts, Randy. As a former NFL general manager, we had not heard publicly whether or not Aaron Rodgers, of course, was going to even wanted to play for the Jets. We didn't know. We were all waiting. He joins the Pat McAfee Show, and he says publicly, I am playing football in 2023 because, again, retirement was hanging out there. And then number two, I intend to play for the New York Jets. Randy, what does that mean? Because technically Aaron Rodgers is still a member of the Green Bay Packers. So what does this public plea mean if you're interpreting it?
Well, I don't know that it changes anything. I think we all thought his intent was to lean this direction. And I think the Packers probably were in the same boat. They were hoping that his public reaction would be this. They still have to work out a deal, as you said. He is still a quarterback of the Packers, acting as GM of the Jets, and still with ownership of the Bears. So nothing changes, right, for right now. We've got to get some of these dots connected, some of the boxes checked, and we just haven't done that yet. I think it comes down to this. There's really not a lot of timing that's going to push this along. We could be sitting here a month from now, Paul, and have the same conversation because there's no other team involved. The Jets really have no more leverage other than he wants to come there, and they're the only team that's really acceptance of him and his contract status. I just feel like there's going to have to be some other element interjected here to make a deal. The Packers can hold out for whatever they want, even though the Jets are the only ones bidding. So there's just nothing, no pressure points, if I'm making any sense, to make this deal happen. We all know Aaron's contract is giant. He's going to get a big lump sum of money, but there's not a single day where a mechanism kicks in until September 1 that roster bonus becomes payable. So they can technically sit on this deal till September 1. Now, he does tie up a lot of their cap money. That's the one downside. They've got to be willing to carry this contract. And I'm not saying this will go that long at all. I'm just saying there's not a lot of, other than everybody wanting to turn the page, there's just not a lot of motivation to make it happen to where the Jets should overpay. The Jets don't have any reason to overpay. They're going to end up paying what they pay. And I've understood that the Packers have wanted a first-round pick for Aaron Rodgers the whole time. I believe the truth is going to end up being in the middle somewhere, Paul. I don't think it's going to be that. I think it'll be a lesser package of picks. And I think if the Jets play their cards right, which they have to this point, they're going to get Aaron Rodgers under contract for the next couple of years and not having to give it up nearly as much as people thought a month ago.
Great, Randy. If you were trying to, wave to the fans and kind of do a couple of winks to all the Jet fans that may be in here, mission accomplished, baby. Yes, paying the least amount possible for Aaron Rodgers. I absolutely love it. So, Randy, let's dive into that. You kind of hinted at a little bit of the leverage here, there, everywhere. Who has the leverage? I'm diving through social media, Twitter land. Packers people are like, we have all the leverage for some of the things you just said. The Jets desperately want Aaron Rodgers. We control his rights. We can wait as long as we want because of the creative option. You know, we saw Derek Carr's option was right around Valentine's Day. For this option, it goes all the way to September, so they don't really have this hard deadline, to your point, if they have to wait for it. I hear from Jets people, they're like, oh, we have all the leverage. You just said publicly in the past tense and Aaron Rodgers gone. You want to move on to Jordan Love and all these other things. So who has the true leverage here, Randy?
Well, I think the leverage is determined by timing, and timing doesn't really factor in here. I guess the Packers might have a little bit of leverage in that they don't have to teach Aaron Rodgers and move him into a whole new facility, a whole new comfort zone. They just have to cut the cord. The Jets do have to bring him in. I'm sure they want him available. at least after the draft for mini camps and OTAs and that kind of stuff. So I guess maybe the Packers have a little bit of leverage in that regard. I would say this, to interject and to move it forward. And I'm just surmising, what if a team like Arizona came in and said, hey, we'll give you a first round pick right now, Packers? Aaron Rodgers has no trade clause, does not have a no trade clause. So technically the Packers could turn their back on Aaron Rodgers' wish and trade somewhere else if someone gave them what they want. I'm not saying they're going to do that, but you know what I'm saying? Some other mechanism has to come into play here so that there's some leverage or pressure point to make a deal happen. Otherwise, it's going to have to be probably split down the middle, and everybody's going to have to take less than they thought they were going to get to start the whole negotiation.
Let's pick through that. That's interesting. So we'll continue to play this devil's advocate. You say, what if another team suddenly jumps into the mix if this thing drags on? What about Aaron Rodgers? Because it sounds like if he wanted to, he could make things very ugly. Because, as they said, I was talking about the past tense thing, and they clearly want to go to Jordan Love. What if he's like, oh, okay, you want to keep me on the team? I'm reporting. I'm showing up. I'm a player. I can do that. And I'm going to make life a living hell because you're not going to bench Aaron Rodgers. So how does that situation play? That could be another part of the devil's advocate of like trying to get this thing along. Rodgers mentioned that a few times during the Pat McAfee show. Do right by me. I am. And I need that kind of confidence in my life. I'm clearly the best player in franchise history. I need to have that kind of confidence on a day-to-day basis. But he said a lot of these things that you should treat me right. Do the right thing and get rid of me because you don't want me. I don't want to be here, and I want to be a member of the Jets. So it seems like from that standpoint, devil's advocate, that maybe Rodgers can get nasty if he wants to.
Well, I think he kind of did by even mentioning that. Yeah. The other thing was he made this sound like this was all the Packers' move, that he really hadn't decided yet, but he came out of his dark and deep meditation time and said, hey, they shopped me, so now I'm going to turn the page and I'm going to play and I'm going to prove that they're wrong. So he definitely chose not the high road in his exit, but the low road. And it's going to be ugly at some point. But if I'm Brian Gutekunst, Mark Murphy, I'm going to do what's right for the Packers. I don't really care. He can report if he wants. We're not playing any games. Let him report. He's not going to create any more animosity being in the building other than just for the media's sake, but it's not going to hurt our team. So I think that's a little bit of a failed attempt to create leverage, if you will. I don't think he's going to do that. I don't think he wants anything to do with that. My guess is that cooler heads will prevail at some point because they're just none of these lever points really hold up. So I think if he wants to go, that's where the Packers want him to go. The Jets are probably going to have to pay something in between, but let's don't forget the Jets paid a 4th round pick that was conditionally moved up for Brett Favre, right? I'm sure that's what they're saying right now. So this thing will probably end up settling on a 2 going to something, or maybe a 2 and a 3 going to something the following year. It'll be a conditional pick or 2. And I think that'll be the best the Packers can do. At some point, the Packers are going to want this money. They're going to want to be able to plan their cap and plan their team. So I guess that's maybe the leverage point. Everybody wants to move on with where they are as a team build.
Before we move this conversation forward, I just want to ask a quick question here. Is it a formality in your mind that Aaron Rodgers is going to be a New York Jet? It's just a matter of when.
I would say it's 95% sure. Yeah. Again, there's always could be something crazy where somebody, maybe it's the, Houston Texans, or I'm just throwing out a team, somebody that this might make sense to, that's not settled on a quarterback, makes a move and said, hey, what about this? The fact that it hasn't been closed yet gives you that awkward feeling that somebody could interject at some point, some kind of information that could open the door more than a crack, but the door is just cracked right now for anything else.
So let's ride that 95%. If Aaron Rodgers ends up going to the Jets, how does that impact the AFC East pecking order? Because obviously you have the Buffalo Bills, who have been the kings of the division since prying that cold torch out of the dead, cold hands of the New England Patriots. And, of course, you have the Miami Dolphins, who continue to try to make blockbuster moves like Jalen Ramsey. If Rodgers joins the Jets, there's a lot of offseason to go, more free agency, the draft, and everything else. But at this point, how does Rodgers joining the Jets impact the AFC East pecking order in your mind, Randy?
Well, I think it puts the Jets at or near the top. I'm not ready to say they're going to dethrone Buffalo, but they're definitely going to be a source to be reckoned with, without a doubt. I think it's really one of the strongest divisions as is, and I think the addition of Aaron Rodgers just makes it even stronger. The Jets held their own for the most part last year within their own division, and Miami's in the mix, obviously. Buffalo we know is good, and it'll be fun to watch. I think the fact that the Jets have a nucleus of really good younger players makes this fit of Aaron Rodgers even better. And again, and I've said this before, I think this eliminates the shadow of Zach Wilson as well, because now he's in the backdrop, has really no issue with anything. He's not going to be screaming to play because he's not going to beat out Aaron Rodgers anyway. So I think it serves a purpose for the team build going forward to where it puts the Jets in a good spot. I do think it'll be interesting to see. Making these moves on paper is one thing, but the dynamics of the leadership of that team, the dynamics of how these guys come together, that's really up to a coaching staff, in my opinion. And so we've got to get through that part. I think when we crown teams before we even get to the season, I think that's a little dangerous. So we'll see how this fits in. I like the move for the Jets. It clearly makes them one of 3 or 4 teams to consider in the AFC as a chance to go to the Super Bowl.
Zoinks! Yeah, baby, that's what I'm talking about. Randy, yes, Super Bowl, Jets, same sentence. I haven't been able to talk about that in 54 years, for Pete's sake. So that is spectacular. Now, let's get to this portion of the exam, and this was not addressed during the Pat McAfee interview. A lot of people are wondering about it. Aaron Rodgers is 39 years of age, of course. He will turn 40 at the back end of the regular season of this upcoming year. And maybe we just won't know this because, again, retirement. He mentioned, Aaron Rodgers said heading into his darkness retreat, 90% in his mind he was going to retire, 10% chance he plays, and then he had some level of an epiphany in this hut that he was in, and he decided against it that he's going to play. What do you believe is the view here? Are the Jets getting multiple years out of Aaron Rodgers? Do we have to wait for the trade compensation, and then thus on that price we could determine whether or not he is in here for a multi-year investment or whether it's just 1 year? What do you think, Randy?
Well, if I'm the Jets, it definitely dictates what I'm willing to give in compensation. And that opened a door that they had to have had this conversation with him when all the group flew out there to California last week. I think that had to be on the topic of discussion because you don't know what you're going to give up for a guy that's a one year wonder. And if it's 2 years, fine. Maybe we give up a little more. That's what I'm saying is there's probably going to have to be a pick later on. Maybe it's some kind of a, 3rd or 4th round pick this year, but the meat of the deal will have to come next year after the season. And once Aaron Rodgers decides if he's going to play again or not, this is not a risk-free proposition for the Jets. Trust me, this guy is a weird duck. He could do anything at any time. He could say anything at any time. We all have seen that transpire the last couple years. And I'm not sure that's my opinion. I think that's just fact of watching how he has operated the last 2 years. So, if he plays 2 years and if he should even play further than that, the Jets should have to pay more. If he plays 1 year, the deal should be what it is. That's why I think it's going to be a conditional, either a conditional pick or a conditional set of picks, depending on how long Aaron Rodgers commits and probably how successful the Jets are with Aaron Rodgers. So those are the two components that I'm sure they're talking about now as far as conditions and where the pick elevates to or not.
And again, I believe that's a fair price because we don't know. And I imagine Aaron Rodgers, who has been enjoying this year-to-year evaluation, would not like to put it in pen and paper. Of course, I want to play 2 years. And again, 15 years ago, the Brett Favre deal, that conditional 4 was all dependent on, first off, snap percentages and then the levels of success for the Jets, playoffs, Super Bowl. And those kind of ascensions rose up the draft grade by a singular round for each of those. It seems to make the most sense to cover all our bases potentially here. And we'll see. What's your gut say, Randy? When does this thing get done? Is it something that cooler heads prevail over the weekend, next week, or is this something that you believe drags? What's your gut say?
Well, I think it'll get done before the draft because there'll be some pick that they want to use this year. So what's the draft? A month away. So we got 4 or 5 weeks here. I don't think it's going to deal. It's a deal that's going to happen over the weekend. I think in the next 2 or 3 weeks, they will iron out the details of it to make it fair. I think they've got to take the emotion out of it. I think the Packers were probably stung by the low road that Aaron took in that interview. I don't think they wanted it to get deep and dirty. I think they would hope that everybody would take the high road in exiting. I'm not sure Aaron did take the high road. I wish he had personally, but I think it'll come out in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I think it may take a commitment from Aaron as to how long he wants to play. The problem is now that Aaron's turned the page to the Jets, and it's also Aaron's agenda to make the Jets pay as little as possible to the Packers.
Of course, right.
Yeah, so that enters into the equation now as well, and who knows? Maybe there's a pick, and we mentioned this, I think, last week on the show, Paul. The Packers might have to throw in a pick a fourth or fifth round pick this year to get a higher pick in return. So there's
Correct.
negotiation is multi-leveled.
100%. And there's been a lot of thought that players could be involved as well. One player in particular, the Jets went on the wish list to get an Allen Lazard from the Green Bay Packers. He seems to play a very similar role to a guy on Corey Davis on the team, who the Packers actually called the Jets about in trade conversations last year. So it seems like they could be holding him hostage to flip him as part of a bigger trade. So there's a lot of moving pieces in this conversation, Randy. There's no question about it. But let's get back to the thing we're going to start all this off with, and we'll work into overall NFL free agency frenzy. We had the legal tampering period start on Monday at noon, and for 48 hours and change, teams were allowed to have their free agency before free agency. And now we are full dive deep into free agency with the new league year kicking off yesterday at 4 o'clock, Wednesday, 4 o'clock. So let's get into this here. Are there any values that you just love? Normally, I would say that the values don't really come early because that's where all the money's really going. But are there some deals that raised your eyebrow and you kind of did a slow head nod like, yes, that's what I'm talking about as a former NFL general manager? Good deal, whoever you were. Who was that? Who got some good deals?
Well, I always view it from this standpoint. Is it an impact position? Did they spend money on a big guy? And that's usually big guys, fast guys. If you can spend money and spend it reasonably, I think you can look at those deals as being positive, especially if a guy is under 30 years of age. The one that jumped out to me, there was a couple of them that I thought are really good deals, but they're big money deals. So you can't say they're bargains. But Tremaine Edmonds going from Buffalo to Chicago, I think Matt Eberflus defense is going to put him in a position to not only play inside linebacker, but probably do some rushing on third down. So he becomes a third down rusher. His body and his frame is tailor-made to be an outside linebacker. He's a taller guy that I think inside there's a lot of stuff going on. You put him on the edge and let him rush the passer, which I think they'll do to get the most out of this money that they paid him. I mean, the deal is $18 million a year. So you wouldn't normally pay that for an inside linebacker. But this one, I think, comes with some pluses and some bells and whistles because I think he can be a rusher. I like that move. I also like the Javon Hargrave move, the 49ers picking him up from Philadelphia. Now, you say that's not exactly a value at $21 million a year, but he's a difference maker. These kind of players are first-round picks in free agency, so to speak. So I don't think there's any question that they'll be good players in a new scheme. They're young enough to adapt. They also still have they're going to good defenses. So those probably were the two things that jumped out at me the most were Hargrove's deal to go to the 49ers and Edmonds' deal to go to the Bears. I like them, even though they're two of the top 6 money average per year deals that have been done.
Yeah, and I just have to say on Tremaine Edmonds, what a unique story. When he was drafted, he was 19 years old. He was a little baby. He was there. They probably drafted him with the crib. And now at 24 years of age, getting his first taste of free agency as a first-round draft choice at 6'5", 250 pounds. That's a great investment. When you're a general manager and you're making that kind of investment, when you're getting that second wave contract at such a young age, that is worth it. And to your point, maybe that outside linebacker rushing the passer, you're like, yeah, we paid a lot of money, but look at all the different stuff he's going to do. Absolutely love that move too, Randy.
He brings a lot of flexibility, and it makes me feel old, Paul. I'll tell you, I signed his dad, who was a tight end with the Dolphins, to finish his career with the Seahawks way back in the 80s. So Farrell Edmonds was a really good player, another big, tall tight end out of Maryland, and that's pops. So these deals make me feel old for sure.
Yeah, and remember, all the kids are there. You got Terrell Edmonds, who's still in the league, and Tremaine's other brother as well. So they got a whole family affair that's happening there. Let's go to the other side. Well, I know you highlighted even big money, but they're going to present, again, you get what you pay for, so to speak. You're going to get a good opportunity there, but it's not always you get what you pay for. Who overpaid? Who got jobbed, Randy? Who just did not get do a good job out there? Who completely overpaid for some of these guys, or maybe even some surprises that kind of raised your eyebrow?
I use the same philosophy that I do in drafting high. There are certain positions, Paul, that I just wouldn't spend crazy money on. And, the Bengals decided to let their safety, Jesse Bates, go after 1 year on the tag, and the Falcons signed him. That's $16 million a year for a safety. I just don't know if you gain the value out of a safety. That's a position that's hard to have a giant impact on your field. It's also one that I think you can fill in with at a lesser value. So I think that could be a questionable deal at the end of the day. I know Jesse Bates is a true free safety who can run, he can cover. I don't know that he's a great box player. So he's not an all-around safety, in my opinion. Now, these are all just picking your flavor, right? Obviously, the Falcons think different of this, but I just wouldn't spend this kind of money, top free agents' dollars, on a safety, just like I wouldn't spend it on a guard. I wouldn't spend it on a fullback, and sometimes even a tight end. Those are just not impact players, and the Falcons have done quite a bit of that. I mean, we know a couple of years ago they drafted a tight end with the third pick in the draft. They've paid some of their own offensive linemen, interior guys, a lot of money. So I guess my question probably comes from a team building standpoint and a philosophical standpoint of what the Falcons are doing. So I struggle with paying safeties that kind of money. The other ones, to me, Denver signed 2 offensive linemen, Mike McGlinchey from the 49ers and Ben Powers from Baltimore.
Yeah.
I don't know that McGlinchey is in the prime of his career. I understand that they're trying to change culture in Denver, and he's going to go a long ways toward that. He's a great character guy. He was a former first-round pick in Notre Dame, Golden Domer. We all know what that comes with. So I understand the fit. I understand the bio and all the leadership qualities that may come with it. To me, Mike McGlinchey has always lacked a little sand and struggled against power rushes, and he's not the greatest athlete either. So I think they maybe have overpaid a tad for Mike McGlinchey, but I understand getting him to go to Denver may have been the reason they had to overpay. But a tackle like him with, I think, some inadequacies at $17.5 million average per deal, that's a little bit of a struggle for me as well. I would hope that for $17 million a year, you get more of a well-rounded player without too many weaknesses. Again, I understand what Sean Payton is trying to do there. They've made a lot of additions over the last 3 days in trying to get the rest of the talent level up to help Russell Wilson, to help that team get over the hump. I don't know that at the end of the day, they're going to be happy with Mike McGlinchey a year or two from now, with cap numbers that get into that 25, 30 million range.
You mentioned the Falcons, and again, fine on Jesse Bates. If you have a drink and you're watching, please pour one out for Kyle Pitts. They traded for Jonnu Smith. Free Kyle Pitts, for the love of everything that's holy. You slept in with the 4th overall pick. I mean, for goodness sake, what are we doing down there in Atlanta? I don't know, Randy. I just feel for the young man and all the fantasy football, people out there as well that had high hopes for Kyle Pitts. Man, that guy is locked in a prison down there in Atlanta. It's absolutely wild. So,
well, it's hard to feature tight ends in an offense, Paul. That's the problem. Yeah. You can only do so much. Tight ends usually come with the fact that the system has to get them open, or you have to make a conscious effort to make them the focus of your passing game. And there's really only so much you can do with tight ends like that. And everybody's going to say, well, Pitts is more than a tight end. He might be, but the scheme still has to fit, and you have to make him a target. I would rather spend my money on fast outside receivers that people have a hard time covering. But we all know Arthur Smith's offense. It's a little different. He wants to matriculate the ball down the field, as we've been told. It's just a different scheme for me. And they've definitely gone the team building route to fit that scheme. I'm more of one that I want to score from way out. I don't want to have to run 12, 14 plays to score a touchdown. And that's really what what I think that the route they've chosen in Atlanta to run Arthur Smith's offense, and they're sure supporting it by signing guards and tight ends, and some of these positions that normally aren't seen as impact positions on Sundays.
Man, if only there was a receiver available in that draft that went 5th overall to the Cincinnati Bengals. Oh, yes, Jamar Chase. Jeez, Lou. Anywho,
I hear you.
I digress. But let me throw this one out there. Very interesting. And for this guy to get the deal that he got so quickly, Sam Darnold. San Francisco obviously has a very complicated situation with the quarterback scenario. Yeah. You have Trey Lance they invested a lot in. You had Brock Purdy, but he had the unique UCL injury. Trey Lance obviously was out for the season last year as well, so he's going to be doing some rehab. So really, Sam Darnold may have a chance, depending on the health status of others, to really get in there. And there's a lot of thought that the San Francisco 49ers were interested a long time ago in Sam Darnold. Really, really interesting that Kyle Shanahan apparently prioritized that very early during the free agency period there, Randy.
I think if you asked Kyle Shanahan, Paul, gave him a little truth serum maybe, if he would rather have Jimmy G or Sam Darnold, he would say Sam Darnold. He's getting one for, $5 million a year, and he's letting one go for $25 million a year. So I think the 49ers would say they got the best in that deal. Now, time will tell. But I think it's an interesting signing, like you mentioned. I think it's an excellent signing. I don't think Sam Darnold's time in Carolina is going to be held against him. I think that offense was somewhat of a mess. I think his time in New York, as you know, was a mess. So I still think there's some tread on the Sam Darnold tire. And I think going in there with Brock Purdy, going in there with Trey Lance, it's really a strong room, in my opinion. And I would not be shocked if Sam Darnold got some reps next week or next year with the 49ers. So I like the get. I'm surprised Sam committed this early in the process, especially on a one-year deal. I'm assuming, being a California kid, this makes sense for him to come home. But I'm surprised that he didn't play the game of free agency a little longer, ending up somewhere else, maybe for more money. But like I said, maybe there's some intangible issues here that make sense for both sides.
No question about it. Again, as you mentioned, a former USC product gets to go back where he grew up and where he lived, and obviously the comfortability and the sweet promises of Kyle Shanahan, who has been heralded as an offensive genius, and obviously the PT potentially to playing time. Now, let me ask you this, Randy, because this is interesting, because obviously free agency hits us before the draft. We're in the middle of legal tampering periods over. We're in the middle of free agency, and then the draft is about a month and a half away. How much do free agency outcomes in March actually influence NFL draft strategy? Because I've heard a lot of people have the mentality that, okay, we're going to try to fill as many holes as possible now in free agency so we could go BPA when the draft comes. So what are your thoughts on this process as a former NFL general manager that's been in that position before?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think all these GMs have all this information in their minds right now. Here's the way I always believed that was the best way to handle it. We would start meeting in December to go through and stack the backboard players in the draft. In other words, that's players from the 5th round down. We would stack those so we'd have an idea of depth, what was going to be available in the later part of the draft. Then we would take January to look at all possible free agents. We would stack all of our pro scouting grades. We would get our free agent board ready to go in January. And then we would bring the college scouts back and go through and stack the front side of our draft board of college players. So we would, at the end, before we even went to Indianapolis, we already had a feel for what the depth and quality is going to be, free agency and the draft. So that's a lot of information. But I always wanted to try to fill, like you mentioned, as many holes as we could with value spots in free agency, which allows us on draft day to pick the best available player. I didn't want to go into a draft with a bunch of needs because I think it limits your movement around in that draft whether you have to go up or down to start filling needs. That always made me nervous. Now, I've been with some teams that start filling needs in the first pick. I don't like that. Really don't want any part of that. I think I've seen teams pick players to fill depth charts on chalkboards instead of that, they've bypassed really good players to fill needs on their depth chart. I don't like that philosophy. I think you end up with a bunch of mediocre players and you pass on really good values in the draft for that reason. But I think I would like to have as many options and be open to drafting the best players that I can on draft day. And to do that, I think you've got to work free agency with that. Now, that doesn't mean you have to go spend a bunch of money in free agency. Doesn't mean you got to go sign guys at 15, 20 million a year. But between now and the draft, the next 5 weeks, you have to identify, in my opinion, some young ascending players. So these are players age 25 to 28 who haven't fit somewhere else or have escaped over the wall somewhere else. Use whatever terms you want, but if they're available and they fit with some area that we really need, let's sign them right now. And it opens up all kinds of things that we can do on draft day. I just think you've got to juggle robbing Paul to pay Peter, the whole thing, all under one roof. And we've talked about it. These GMs all think like this for the most part now, but it's easier said than done. Team building is different than evaluating players. And that's the biggest problem like a new GM would have. They're used to sitting in a room, evaluating a player, and then picking a particular player. Team building is not like that. Team building is, yes, evaluations and having convictions on your evaluations, but it also is identifying and acquiring the right player for the right price. That allows you to pick the right players come draft day. Long-winded answer, but I hope that makes sense. Everybody does it their own way. This is just the way I've always believed in doing it. And I think it's worked well for me in the past.
Randy, we have the same ideologies, and hell, damn it, I'm sure that we would have made a hell of a front office tandem. We would have won a bunch of Super Bowls. Our butts would be in Canton right now. Why did the world keep us apart for so long, Randy? We could have done some real damage. I'm telling you, Randy, we could have done some real damage. There's just
I hear you.
no question about it. Let's, everyone talks about, the front, all the star players that get signed on, the first day of free agency or negotiated during the legal tampering period. Well, let's go in the back of the refrigerator. The old free agency leftovers that some people overlook, but quite frankly, they're still delicious too. Everyone's window's a little different. Hey, I'll wait 2 or 3 days for my leftovers, what have you. That is, beauty in the eye of the beholder, I suppose. But who are some of the best free agents available that right now are sitting out there? And you're like, man, somebody's got to go get this guy. Whether, to your point earlier, Randy, you mentioned premium positions, or maybe players that are still out there that's a little surprising. Maybe their market didn't develop the way they would have wanted, but they could still be an impact guy here as we start moving to other tiers of free agency.
Yeah, I think it's a great time. And I've been with some teams, Paul, where their main number one goal when free agency started was to stay out of it for the first week. Ooh. They just want to let the dust settle. They want to let the big money be spent, and then we'll hone in on exactly what we're going to do. And I think there are some players that are available still. I mean, we're only into this a couple of days.
Of course.
Take, for example, a guy like C.J. Gardner-Johnson with the Eagles, a corner that played nickel that the Eagles didn't get till the first week of the season. Had a really good year. I think he ended the year with 6 interceptions, tying for that lead. I think there's value there. He's a young guy. He's only 25 years old. These are the kind of values that I'm talking about that I would love to be able to sign if I was somewhere else, because I think as he transitions to safety, you will have got him at the right time in his career to where he can still develop and get good. I think another guy you'd have to look at, and again, I'm looking at premium type positions. I believe a nickel guy is a premium. I think a tackle is premium. A guy like Isaiah Wynn, who is the Patriots left tackle, maybe not had a great year this year, but had come off 2 solid years before that. 27 years old, got 3 or 4 years as a starting tackle in the league. Maybe not 6'5" like everybody was looking for, but depending on your offensive scheme and the way you teach and coach, I think a guy like Isaiah Wynn could be a really good player for somebody. Let's face it, he didn't have a good year last year, like I mentioned. The Patriots offense was a bit of a mess last year. I'm willing to write that off as a 1-year one-off. I think the guy's a good player. He would definitely enter into my radar when the money settles down, before it goes crazy. I think he would be a guy that comes in and starts from day one. And I think you'd have a chance for him to play either tackle, to be honest with you. Another guy I like, and again, we've talked about a corner, we've talked about a tackle. Sure. I want to find a fast guy for a value if I can too. And a guy like McCole Hardman, the receiver from the Chiefs. Mm-hmm. I know he was hurt this year. I get it. But this guy has game-changing speed. And if you put this guy in any draft, he'll be a top 2 or 3 round pick just because of the speed, because teams have to defend you differently, Paul, if you have speed on the field. And he's forced the Chiefs to defend them differently as well. But I think he's a guy, I'm sure most question his health. They question that durability because he was hurt last year a little bit. But that's one I would still spend some time investigating, try to find a value of a right deal with him. I know this, teams have to defend you differently when you have that kind of speed on the field, even if you don't throw them a ton of balls. And so those just 2 or 3 guys that come to my mind that would be still in my top 10 of guys I would look at when signing free agents. Now, you got to match that up with the value in the contract too. So you can't go nuts. And I think those guys are in the mix. Maybe one other guy I'd throw in the mix because of his age, a defensive tackle with the Rams, Greg Gaines, who I think University of Washington kid, plays DT in a 4-man front for the most part for the Rams. Young guy, very productive, not going to make a lot of sacks for you. But these big meat and potato guys on both sides of the line are tough to find. And I think that's a guy you can probably get not for a lot of money. He's a high producer. He's a young age. What is he? 27 years old. Those are the kind of guys, young ascending players who you're still going to get a full contract out of before you have to worry about, is he worth it or not, or durability factors. So there's a few names that I would consider right now.
Yeah, and on Mecole Hardman, my mama once told me that elite speed, you can't teach that, baby.
That's
So,
right.
yeah, God delivered your sign for it. You either have it or you don't. So that is an intriguing quality, no doubt about it, to bring to the table. One guy I'll just throw out there, although C.J. Gardner-Johnson, again, that ball hawk ability, that is intriguing when you could take the ball away. You could get a lot of dollars for that. But Calais
Yep.
Campbell, I know he's an old man. No, he kind of gets overlooked, and it's hard to. He's 6'8" for Pete's sake, but a former
Yep.
Walter Payton Man of the Year, the right moxie perhaps for a team chasing a championship. I know the Ravens said even though they cut him, they'd love to bring him back. Calais Campbell is a guy that I know not a lot of people are going to be breaking down as the top free agent, this or that. I just feel like the mix of veteran leadership, what he could still bring to the table, and it looks like he's going to give it at least one more year run, as he announced
Yeah.
on the NFL Network during Super Bowl week. He's a guy that really titillates my juices.
Yeah, I totally agree. And he comes at a primary position of
Yes.
can make a big difference. How about this? Picture this. And I'm a Seattle guy, so I always think, how would that fit in with the Seahawks? What if the Seahawks brought back Bobby Wagner and signed Calais Campbell? Do you think their defense would have a little different look? I know they're older guys. I understand that. And we're building for young for the most part. But there's two guys that would make Pete Carroll's last couple of years in the league, I would think, pretty sustainable. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think he'd be a good get. He's been good everywhere he's been. So for all the reasons you mentioned.
100%. And that's, I think, a unique entity that should really rev people's engines is when you're going to different spots. And again, from Jacksonville, Arizona, Baltimore, when he's been dropped to these different places and still figures out, you're like, the situation keeps changing, but he keeps staying good. I think that's a good egg, as my mama once told me. Let's wrap up the show as we do every week, going into the GM notebook. And people, if you're new to the show, first off, welcome. Although you should have been here the whole time, jump on the train, baby. This is where we get to some random quick hitting nuggets during the show we may have not covered already that may have caught Randy's eye this week. And one that certainly raised a few eyebrows here, Randy, was Austin Ekeler, from both sides, quite frankly. His side requesting permission to seek a trade, and the Chargers saying, sure, go find one. He's due to make $6.5 million this year. What do you make of this entire situation? He seemed to be a key cog, a touchdown machine there in the Bay with all kinds of really talented guys like Justin Herbert and company.
Well, fantasy owners will have a problem with this, that's for sure, because they know how valuable he's been in fantasy football the last 4 or 5 years. Like you said, a touchdown scoring machine. He's in the last year of a contract. I know he wants a new deal. For some reason, the Chargers have elected not to give him a new deal at this point, and they've given permission to shop for a gig somewhere else. I don't think he'll have a hard time getting the contract. I really don't. I think someplace like Denver, where Sean Payton is going to put in and look for an Alvin Kamara, a guy like that to play on third downs, to do some things in the passing game. If he gets in the right scheme and the right situation, I could see him not only getting a new contract, but continuing to lead the league in touchdowns every year like he did in San Diego. So that one caught me a little bit by surprise because I don't think his demands would be crazy. I think I know the people that represent him. I think he'd be a good get for about any NFL team, especially one where the third down back is coupled with kind of a thunder and lightning, another back that can play on first downs and take more of the beating. Because let's face it, Austin's a smaller guy. I think durability is always a concern, but he's done his fair share to earn, I think, another deal with some other team if it's not the Chargers.
All right, Randy, I can finally ask you this. I've been wondering it in fandom for a long time. You just mentioned it. There's a potential team that could make sense of the Denver Broncos. When you were an NFL general manager, Randy, did you have any steadfast rule on trading inside your division? Because me as a fan guy and, kind of being all over the place, I said, if any team came to call me, there is a luxury tax. If I'm trading it inside the division, I'm charging you a little bit more than charge a guy in the NFC for random instance. Did you implore or imply a similar rule when operating? Or, hey, if I can find a good trade, I can find a good trade. I don't care if it's with my grandma, my brother, my sister. It doesn't matter as long as we get a good deal. What were your thoughts?
Well, I think it's great on paper to have that philosophy. And yes, I would love to trade somebody outside the division where we didn't have to play against them twice. But the thing is, you have to have convictions in what you're doing and your own evaluations. And if this guy is so good that you're worried about playing against him, why are we trading him? So I don't know that goes hand in hand with reality. And of course, this comes from a guy who had Wes Welker in Miami. We traded him to the Patriots within our own division for a second and a 7th round pick. I thought it was a lot at the time because Wes Welker hadn't really done much for us in Miami. Great guy, great kid. We just couldn't figure out how to use him. So I thought that was an easy move for us. Ended up having a great career with New England, probably more so than he would have ever had with us in Miami. So it can come back to bite you for sure. But I just think if you have convictions in what you're doing, don't be afraid to make the best deal you can. And if it takes a team within your own division to offer you that much more, I think you got to do it. You got to do what's right for the franchise for sure. And then it's up to you to replace that person so that you don't miss him per se. Although fans always have an attachment to guys, and if they see him come back to beat their former player, you got to be willing to take the heat.
All right, so great. Wes Welker on the Patriots was your fault. That's good to know as a Jets fan. I know who to blame for all those years of Wes Welker touchdowns. Thank you, Randy. We'll have to discuss that more off air on the future of the show. All right, let's get to another one here, which is really interesting. And this one blew my mind. I'm going to be honest, Randy. When Lamar Jackson got the non-exclusive tag, I said, let me think. Team number one that's calling Lamar Jackson, the Atlanta Falcons, who have absolutely nothing going on down there in the quarterback conversation, but they already added a new quarterback to the mix, and quite frankly, and that's Taylor Heineke, by the way, on top of what they have with Desmond Ridder. I'm stunned. I'm flabbergasted. Diana Rossini tweeted out very quickly after that decision was made that the Falcons are not going to be interested, and the Falcons official account retweeted it. And I'm like, what the who is going on here? Yeah. Shouldn't Atlanta be all in on Lamar, but somehow ATL all out?
Yeah, no, I was surprised at that as well. I was surprised that several teams that came out right away and said they weren't interested in Lamar. I think the problem with the Lamar deal really is twofold. One, the fact that he does not have an agent. Other teams just aren't sure how to enter the fray. They're not sure if that's even the line of communication is going to get a deal done. The other one is I think Lamar's made it clear he wants a fully guaranteed deal. So that's going to keep a lot of teams from even picking up the phone. So that may be the issue that Atlanta said right away. We're not going this route because we're not guaranteeing a full deal. And I totally get it. I'm not a big Taylor Heineke guy. I understand his intangibles, his leadership skills, the fact that the other guys in the locker room love him. I get it. I think it's clear there that Desmond Ridder is the guy they want to go with. I think that's still a period of development. It's going to take another year or two before he's really if you can convince me that he's an NFL quarterback. I see a spurts of it last year, but I think in that kind of an environment, they're going to have to find a way to get better around him. And that's why I question some of the moves they made. I don't see him getting better at the right positions around him. I agree with you. I think Lamar would be a great fit on paper for Atlanta and for that system. But for those reasons that I gave earlier, I just don't know that it's going to be a fit. So sometimes I wonder, and I don't want to beat up on the Falcons. I don't know what they're doing sometimes. And I know when this regime got to Atlanta that they were stuck behind the 8 ball from some prior commitments salary-wise. They couldn't even make a move. But this will be year 3. So it's a big year for Arthur Smith, for Terry Fontenot, for these guys to kind of get over the hump. Hopefully some of these moves for their sake are going to do that for them because I know them both. I like them. They're going to have to show progress for me to really understand what direction they're taking this team.
Again, I know that they seem, Atlanta out as we see ATL out on Lamar. But I got to be honest, the jersey swaps online, very sexy. Michael Vick 2.0, It looks sexy. So if they decide to change their mind, hey, stamp of approval from old boy Green to get in on that action. No question about it. Let's get to another. Speaking of sexy, Odell Beckham Jr. This is a guy who didn't play a lick last year after playing in the previous Super Bowl, not this past year's Super Bowl, the Super Bowl before that. Tears his ACL, wins a ring, sits it out, flirts with some playoff teams, potentially join the mix, ultimately does not. And actually, by all the tape from his workout in Arizona, where a lot of teams were represented, between 12 and 14 teams were there, Odell Beckham Jr. apparently looked good from people that were there. What is going on here? We've heard some reports that he's looking anywhere between 15 and 20 million per year, which seems a little rich, especially for a guy that's had the ACL history and did not play at all last year. What are the barriers to getting a deal done? Is he better waiting till after the draft when teams miss out on guys? Can he get that kind of rich deal, or is it going to be maybe incentives-based or something? What's your read on the Odell Beckham OBJ situation?
Well, my read is I saw that video too, and he looked impressive to me. I thought this would be the case that nobody could sign him a year ago, even at the end of the season, because he wasn't going to be ready. When you tear your ACL in February, we're only 13 months removed from that. Correct. So it's not like he's been away from the ACL, and he had 1-2 years before that, like you mentioned. So I do think there'll be a market for him. I don't think it's going to be 15 million. I don't think anybody's going to pay that price. There will be some conditions involved with it, but I think he's in a good spot in that he should be able to pick a team that's pretty good and be able to produce as some incentives that will pay him maybe to that 15 million, but he's going to have to earn some of those. He's going to have to prove that he can be productive and durable to get to that number. I think there'll be some teams that want to do it. And I think there'll be good teams, whether it's a team like the Dallas Cowboys or, maybe even a team like the Jets or the Giants per se. I know the Giants had some interest in him a year ago. He came in there and I don't think he passed the physical and wasn't going to be ready. I think they could use an OBJ as well. So there's going to be a market for him. It's just a matter of when and where. And I think a team will sign him before the draft. I don't think they're going to want to wait. I think if they had, this goes to with what we were saying earlier, if they had an OBJ under contract and in the fold, gives them a lot more options on draft day. They don't have to draft a receiver per se. I just want options on draft day, and having OBJ would give me more options as a team builder.
Oh, no question about it. Again, Odell Beckham Jr., again, the former LSU Tiger, is a very interesting and potentially sexy ad if somebody wants to do it. And I will say that I was going to throw it up here on the screen, but I'll just tell you guys, Aaron Rodgers on the Pat McAfee Show said, who wouldn't want OBJ on the team? I tweeted that out. OBJ tweeted back at me, hey, with the waving emoji. What does it mean? I don't know. I'm not some interpreter, but OBJ Jets, bring him back to New York could be great. You heard it there from Randy. Why not, baby? Who wouldn't want to catch passes from Aaron Rodgers? Come on. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah. And vice versa. Who would not want to throw to OBJ? So I agree with Aaron in that case. I think anybody would want to sign him. It's a matter of fitting it in cap-wise. And again, this is now, teams have more money available now than they will after the draft. That's why I think something should happen with OBJ in the next week or two.
Again, we'll see if that ultimately does happen. Randy, another fantastic show here, talking all things free agency. Frenzy, Aaron Rodgers. Thankfully, I didn't have to do anything crazy. We talked about last week. Please, for the love of everything holy, have some level of an update on Aaron Rodgers. And thankfully, we did. Right in the nick of time the day before, Randy. So I can continue to breathe and live on my life. We will see what other new events take place at that point. Well, Randy, thanks as always, pal. And I'm looking forward to next week. I'm sure we'll have a lot more fun stuff to get into.
Thanks once again, Paul. Looking forward to it too. I enjoy these shows, so I appreciate you having me ride along with you.
Amen. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will see you next week right here on the channel. Thanks.